The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. You know, it would really help if I turn a camera on, wouldn't it? 236 shows, and I still, what the fuck? God almighty. Hi, I'm Jim Peters. Come to you cordless from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and welcome to another edition of Jim Peters AtNight. Will we ever do it flawlessly? No, although last night show went pretty smooth. Actually, last night we might have. That's 235 shows. We might have nailed it finally. It's Tuesday night, June 3rd, 2025. And like I said, this is show number 236. Yeah, we're finally getting it. You know, what the hell? Who knows? All right, before I go on, I told you about this last night at the end of the show. I'm going to do it at the top. Yesterday, it was 91 degrees here in Minneapolis. Today, the high was 65. It's crazy. You know, I don't know if you guys know this. This is really true. The television meteorologists, if you want to go someplace in America for your career, you come here because it's the most interesting weather in the United States. And that's no lie. Our guest tonight is Anton Chaitkin. He's the author of, and I'm going to read this because otherwise I'm not going to get this right either. He's the author of Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress. It's the second volume of a 3-volume series. First volume 1 came out in 2020. This just came out about a month ago, if I'm right. And we taped this afternoon. This sounds like a really dry subject, but seriously, stick around and listen to this because this guy, I have to say, I found this really fascinating. Maybe that's because I'm a geek and or a dork or whatever. I don't know, but this guy really knows his stuff. And yeah, so he's the former history editor for Executive Intelligence Review. He did that for 20 years, and he was also the co-author of the definitive unauthorized biography of George Bush Sr., which came out in 2004, which was highly, highly regarded. Him and I think a guy named Walter Tarnay wrote it, if I'm right. I can't remember the other guy's name. They wrote that book together. Anyway, yeah, he's our guest tonight. Now, what do we got coming up for the rest of the week? Tomorrow night, Jeff Meyer was supposed to be here. He just told me this afternoon he can't make it, so we are going to run a rerun. And the rerun we're running is from May 21st, and that's the episode with Miriam Hanane. She's the investigative journalist who wrote a very large book called Operation George Floyd, where she explains what happened when George Floyd allegedly got murdered, or, well, he died, that's for damn sure, but he probably was not killed, except maybe by himself. I mean, he appears he actually died of a drug overdose and not by Derek Chavez's knee on his neck. Anyway, we're going to run that tomorrow. We're going to run that Thursday night. Bruce Solheim is going to be here. He's back from a year ago. He's a history professor, and I forgot to look this up again. I think it's Claremont College in California, and he's a UFO experiencer. He's written 11 books. He had 2 books, both come out this April, just about 6 weeks ago. Excuse me. They're graphic. Well, they're not novels. I was going to say they're graphic novels. The first book is an autobiography of himself. It's in graphic form. That would be like, comic book form, basically. Whatever, that's a crude way to put it. But that book is about his life. Then he has a second book in the series called Dr. Jekyll, which is about a woman who chases down UFOs. That's a novel. And so that is truly a graphic novel. And so, yeah, he's going to be here. Now, I said this last night, and this is the reason I asked him back. I've had a lot of UFO people on the show. There's a lot of you who don't buy any of this stuff. Matter of fact, I don't know if you kept on watching because I pushed this really hard. Because the thing is, one of my missions here in life is for you folks to realize that the extraterrestrials are coming here. And at this point, I think the proof is irrefutable. I really do. I don't even consider that a belief of mine. It's been proven at this point. They are coming to planet Earth. Now, where they're from, I have no idea. Whether the government knows about this, I have no idea. I don't know any of that. But I do know there's enough proof to basically say they're coming here. I don't know. I can't even tell if they've been coming here for how long, although it appears to be a long time, but I still don't have any definite proof of that. But they're coming here, okay? So Dr. Solheim says that since he was a teenager, he's been communicating with an extraterrestrial named Anzar. And the last time I talked to him, he said he was talking to Anzar still for the last 40 or 50 years, about once a week. Anzar is still talking to him. So, and a friend of mine watched the show who doesn't buy any of this UFO stuff at all. He thinks I'm nuts. But even he said this guy was a credible witness. And he is, because he's very obviously sane. He's very obviously stable. He's been teaching history for 25 years. He's written 11 books. And that's the reason I want him back, because I think he is probably as good witness to extraterrestrial abduction as anybody. So he's coming on Thursday. Next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're taking off. I have funerals I got to go to. Yeah, more, but believe it or not, more than one. On Thursday, Tim Conaway is going to be here, our old friend, executive editor of Hustler Magazine, and we do what we call Shoot the Shit. That's what we do, two old guys. Part two of that show, this is really interesting. Our regular caller, Think, is going to be calling in. We're scheduled this because we did this once before, about a month ago. He gave a report on going to, and now I can't even remember the name of the place. It's a former insane asylum in upstate New York that he went to on his job, of all places. He wasn't actually like out to do anything. He was literally sent there by work. And it turns out the place is insanely haunted. So that was really interesting. This time he's calling in on Thursday. This is going to be next Thursday, not this coming Thursday. That's let me see. That's the 12th. He's going to be doing a report on crop circles, and you have to stick around for this too, because a lot of people think this is bunk, and crop circles are not. First of all, most of them are not made by humans. That's pretty much been established. Now, who's making them, we don't really know. I mean, I can speculate, but no, there's no real. But I can tell you that the majority of them are not made by humans. They aren't. Even though there's two guys, and of course, either the British or American government put those two guys up to this to say they made all the crop circles in the world. Yeah, right. Yeah, tell us about it. Two old guys from Wiltshire in England. We're traveling all over the world. Yeah, making crop circles with their boards. Now, I'm not going to poo-poo this, because in England there are whole, for lack of a better term, regiments of young people, usually college kids, who go around and make crop circles, and they're quite good at it. But the thing is, and this is what Think's going to talk about. It's fairly easy to tell the difference between a quote-unquote real crop circle and a quote-unquote fake one. The fake one's being made by humans, because it's the way the fake ones, or the real ones, excuse me, are not done with, the fake ones by humans are made literally with boards pressing crops down on the ground. And that's not how the real ones aren't made that way. I mean, they aren't pressed onto the ground. It's bizarre. It's highly scientific, and it's really, really weird. And he's going to talk about that. That's a week from this Thursday. So that's what we got coming up. We got the rest of the month booked up. A lot of cool guests coming on. And I tell you what, let's talk to Dr. Chapin right now. Okay, here we go. Joining us from his home in Leesburg, Virginia, Anton Chaitkin, the author of, oh God, this is terrible. It's Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress from Franklin to Kennedy. And this is the second volume. First volume came out in 2020. Anton, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've had quite the career here. I'm going to read this off. You were the history editor for Executive Intelligence Review from 1995 to 2015. You were the co-author of the unauthorized biography of George Bush, and your 1985 book, Treason in America, from Aaron Burr to Avril Harriman, sold 100,000 copies. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So why did you start this series? Well, first of all, I'm assuming there's a third volume that's going to come up, right?
That's right. The second volume that's just come out in April is the 19th century, and it's 600 pages and 48 pages of pictures. But that's the Lincoln era when we developed the country into the world power that it became, with a different philosophy entirely than we have right now. The 20th century up through FDR and Kennedy is going to be the third volume. And this is a new core history of the United States, the 3 volumes, because we've been under the rule of unelected globalists who completely changed our philosophy and took us out of industry after the murder of Kennedy. And so we have to be able to see with new eyes how we actually organize the United States as a power. How do we get our industry? Where did what kind of people and what individuals and what projects actually developed our steel industry, our electrical industry, our railroads? It's completely different than the way the globalists tell the story.
Are you going to address the part after Kennedy? I mean, because that's pretty momentous too.
Yes, of course, I have to address that. But the most important thing is for us to see how we got to the point of mastering nature and providing a high living standard. People are in the recent years, recent generations are not even familiar with a productive life, a productive way of life, and so we have to be able to see what we were able to accomplish and how we did that. So that's the most important thing. The globalist is a struggle on two sides all throughout our history, from the time of the Tories to the present. You have that other side. That's the imperial side. They're the ones who took over after they murdered the Kennedy brothers, and they have always been trying to stop us from industrializing and having an independent nation. But what's not been presented to the public is our side, the people who actually built the country. People know about evil. They know about, often a populist may feel desperate and think that these enemy transatlantic bankers can do anything, and they plan 1,000 years into the future, and they are the ones who gave us everything we have, but they're evil. But that's a completely false idea. They didn't build any industries, and they're very fragile in many senses. They've got people bamboozled about their legitimacy as authorities. But if you, so go ahead.
You just answered my question, because I was going to ask you, do we really know about evil? Because socialism among young people especially is becoming increasingly popular. And I could make an argument that as a system, it is misguided at best and evil at worst.
Well, I think that the answer to this is that we have rights as human beings, and the right to progress and the right to rise. Is that socialism? Is that capitalism and free market? It's a human right, and we answered this with our own system. Let me try to give it a little sense of this history. When Donald Trump first ran for president, there were two things that was in his proposal that panicked the establishment. First of all, he said, I'm going to stop these senseless foreign wars. And then he said, I'm going to overturn so-called free trade by imposing tariffs to restore our industry. And the background of our high standard of living relative to the rest of the world is that the government in our self-governance system went to bat for our people. That is, the government did interfere in trade for the benefit of our people. Is that socialism? No, it's the American system. The British system was the contrasting system that said no other nation will be allowed to rise and gain the powers over nature that Britain has by interfering with trade. We will flood each country with cheap goods. We pay our workers less, and we already have advanced industry, so we can produce for a little bit less. So we will keep you from ever getting manufacturing. So what happened is that our successive leaderships in different times, especially in the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln was the greatest of this. They believed that the people have a right to a decent living standard, a right to peace, and that their government must promote the people's progress. So when Lincoln became president, he was already a lifelong member of a political movement, economic nationalist movement. The headquarters for this movement was in Philadelphia, headed by a man named Henry Carey. He was an economic advisor for Lincoln. When Lincoln was president, he put through Congress a series of measures, the highest tariffs in history, the public support for building different transportation projects, the railroads. He created the Department of Agriculture. That wasn't some government thing that meddled in people's lives. It brought science to the farmers. It's like the space program later on. These are legitimate government programs for the benefit of our nation's interest. He also did the land grant colleges and the free land for farmers. If you work the land, you get the land for free. These measures transformed our country for the better. And then Lincoln's allies in this Philadelphia nationalist group, headed by the Pennsylvania Railroad leaders, set up the steel industry in the United States. They also pushed the tariffs through the Congress. They also set up the petroleum industry. That wasn't Rockefeller. He came in to monopolize it later. They sponsored Thomas Edison. He had to fight J.P. Morgan and the Wall Street London combination, who wanted to stop Edison from building power plants for the ordinary people, for the communities. So you had these two sides. You had the industrialists and statesmen going back to Henry Clay, going back to Hamilton, George Washington. But our side were the nationalists who built the country, who built all the industries. Then on the other side, you had the British imperial interest. This is the city of London. It's the British hierarchy and their representatives in the United States. Boston and New York financiers in the slavery time, the big slave owners of the East Coast were part of that same thing. They're effectively part of the British Empire. They exported the cotton to England. They didn't want us to be industrialized. And the Wall Street characters who were tied into London did not want us to be industrialized either. They wanted to have imports of manufacturing and not allow us, just like the slave owners didn't want to allow us to have tariffs and to have industry here. You have to have tariffs to get industry. That's every country had that. That's not communism. Communism was actually something that was developed. Karl Marx, where did he lived in London, and that was promoted by this British imperial interest to try to crush in certain ways with revolution, with chaos, various of countries that might rise up against them, like the Germans or the Russians. So they didn't want any nation to rise, and they were very, very frightened about America's influence as we rose to industrial prominence. The other feature of our success is that when we were developing our country most strongly, particularly right after the Civil War, we were also helping other countries to develop. The three most notable ones were Germany, Japan, and Russia. And if you follow the history later on, the British were insanely jealous of what we were doing to get those countries into becoming big powers. And they turned all three of those countries against us. Japan and Germany by developing militarism on a British program. Russia by being crushed under the Japanese and British alliance. And then communism, which I think the British actually originally helped to come in there. But they wanted to stop American influence. America was saying every other country has the right to rise. And we have friends in the other nations. Every nation has the same interests. And so that's our actual background. That's who we are as a nation. We were the ones who brought electricity to the world.
Yeah. Anton, so is the problem literally just the fact that some people just want to control other people? I mean, yeah. Economically, you can make an argument that when that all boats rise, I mean, here in the early 21st century with the tech boom we have right now, we have, the average person is becoming more affluent, and you also have tech barons who are getting insanely rich. But overall, I think this is what you're getting at, is that the society prospers. So why wouldn't anybody want that?
Well, it's this form of insanity, this oligarchy.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Look at our economy. It's rotted out since the takedown of our advanced industries, our steel industry. We squelched the development of nuclear power, which we should have had. We stopped the deep space program. We need to get back into. We need high-speed trains. We're way behind, and our labor force has shriveled up. It's not the skilled labor force that we had. Now, wouldn't everybody in all sectors of society benefit from restoring the kind of power for our society and for our industry? Yes, everybody would benefit. But look at the enemy. We have an offshore banking system that was developed in the whole period, especially after the murder of the Kennedy brothers and Dr. King in the 60s. And they have maybe $1 quadrillion or more in derivatives and massive tens of trillions in filthy drug money and other forms of criminal money. They have influence politically. They're interlocked with various security operations and things in the darkest corners of the Pentagon, the CIA, etc. So what is that interest? It's an interest in a kind of a hierarchy over mankind. These are people historically who believe themselves to be in the place of God on this earth. And they are the ones who promote this idea, for example, in religion, that the devil was given power over the world by God. Who would want you to believe something like that? Only the devil would want you to believe that.
Yeah.
Right? These are people, especially in the late 19th century in Britain in particular, who developed anti-human ideology, spin-offs from Darwin and Huxley in the evolution field. And they developed monopolies over our advanced industries, particularly the Morgan firm, which is a British firm. And I have this all in my book, in this second volume, about how Morgan was set up to try to crush American industrial progress and the nationalists to try to take them out. So Morgan comes in there. He's representing the British directly. His father, this is a British bank, and they set up a partnership here to try to stop American independent development. But they have all this kind of dark age ideology. And you ask the question, why will they do this? Why will they do these things? You have to look at the history of the British Empire and some other empires, but they became the center of this evil. This you're talking about the murder of tens of millions of people, the hiring of Hitler by these people in the 1920s. And that was a lot of that was done through the central bank, the Bank of England, which had tremendous influence, particularly in the 1920s, over our new Federal Reserve. That's a single system. That's what's wrong with the Federal Reserve. It's not a national bank. It isn't our country's bank. It's an international interest representing a hierarchy of power over other people. There's two things we could do as human beings. We could cooperate, foster genius, and seek increased powers over nature, that man has powers over nature to advance man. Or you have the other interest is to try to have a small group of people have power over other people. Our system of the American system and our Constitution, it goes back to the we call the Renaissance or Commonwealth side in England, in England and the rest of Europe. The other side goes way back. The empires go all the way back thousands of years. That's true. Right. But these are the two sides, and they compete, but they're not equal. Our side is the side that built everything, that discovered everything. All the great scientists of history, the great astronomers, the ones who made the breakthroughs, the inventors, the most powerful advances have always been made by people who see human beings as made in the image of God, and that we have the interest to do good in the world, and that's what makes us happy. And we want to organize society to promote the kind of genius that is natural to human beings. The other side doesn't agree with any of that.
No.
And these are the globalists who have had power over our society for the last 60, 70 years.
As a matter of fact, sir, I've talked to a lot of people on the show for quite a few years now, and I'm starting to get the impression over the last few weeks that the primary problem with humans throughout history is literally mental illness. You're talking about this small cabal of people. They're crazy. I
wouldn't even use the word humanist. It changed. A lot of words changed in what they mean. Progressive used to mean people who promote the progress of mankind.
Right. That's right.
And that includes industrial progress, right? Not the green agenda. So humanist back in the time of the Renaissance were Christian humanists. That is, they believed in that the Christian religion was in favor of man's interest, and that God was in favor of man, and God was compassionate. Those were the humanists of the Renaissance. The other side harked back to the Dark Age idea, or even the 5,000-year-old idea of a cruel God who didn't care about human beings. You have this division in ancient Greece, where you have the myth of Prometheus, and he's up against Zeus. Prometheus is trying to free mankind from the power of this cruel god Zeus. But that's not the kind of God that we believe in. We believe in a merciful God, and that human beings should imitate God to show mercy. But the way that we can best do that is to have a productive society, to have a productive life, to restore that kind of productive life to our society. And that means we're going to have to, whatever Donald Trump is capable of doing or is able to get away with doing, the issue still remains that we must do the things that he was threatening to do. We have to restore American manufacturing. We have to have a very high standard of living restored to this country. We have to go back to being a high-wage country.
Yeah.
How can you afford to pay high wages? Well, you have to have capital intensive, energy intensive industries. You know, when we developed coal and oil as resources, which they were not resources to begin this country. You cut down trees and that's your fuel. We had to develop the science and the industry and the various technologies and education to be able to do these things. Later, uranium, that became a resource, right? When we developed the science to do it. And that's Einstein is involved in that, and other great scientists going back to the 19th century. But so if for us to thrive now again, we must dedicate ourselves to defying this last 75 years worth of oppression by this deindustrializing clique, transatlantic clique. Part of this has to do with a very mistaken idea of having an alliance with England. We should be friends with Britain as a country, but insofar as we identify with the British in their empire, this is a terrifying error that we have made. This so-called special relationship is a relationship with hell. And it's also, in our history, it goes directly against American independence. The whole idea of American independence is how we distinguish ourselves from the empire. Are we an empire? No, we're a republic. We have a constitution. We don't have hierarchies from birth. You know, and our system tends to raise the level of the poorest people. That was what we used to do. Now China does that. We have to grant them the truth that they are getting people out of poverty. If we don't like their government, let's show the world how our government does better. Right now, we're not bringing anybody out of poverty. We are part of a system of globalism that, with the IMF and with other international institutions, that makes rules for country and the World Trade Organization, all these things, that makes rules that keep people in poverty all over the world. Add in the sanctions, add in the wars. We're sending bombs to several conflicts. And what is that? How is that to our benefit? How is that to anybody's benefit? It's based on the lie of the empire. So if we were to go back to this, the kind of progress orientation that we had, and rebuild the power of the United States for the benefit of our own people, we could be in a position of confidence to extend the hand of friendship to every other country. We would be respected again. People fear us right now. I would say Russia and China, the thing that they fear about us the most is that we are weak. We are weak industrially. Our workforce is weak. Our literacy is weak. Those kind of things. If we became very strong again, then those countries would not fear that we're going to rely on nuclear weapons, which is all we have left. That's insane. That's crazy. We should be very powerful, and then we could cooperate with these other countries. I think we and these other powers ought to be able to go in these conflict areas, such as the Middle East, and say we can't allow this war anymore. We'll have to shut the war down. We'll have to guarantee the safety of both sides. We can do that.
I don't have to tell you this, though. There's an enormous number of people who are making a lot of money off of war. That's part of the thing driving the whole thing.
That's part of it. I agree with you. That's what they get the people at a certain level to do, and they come in on that basis. But they also want chaos. That's how they can rule. They want us to be at each other's throats. They want us to be scared all the time. They get these lunatics to go in and murder people to make us fear that terrorism is something that's completely you can't stop it.
Anton, if you don't mind my saying so, they're creating chaos. So most of this chaos doesn't actually exist.
That's what the war in Iraq was all about. What was the purpose of that? It was to cause more chaos.
Yeah, especially because so 9/11 happened, and then the Bush administration says we're going to go into Iraq, and I'm thinking, and a whole bunch of other people thinking, yeah, but they didn't have anything to do with it. It's like what, you know?
We want to stop people from having backwardness. We complain about the Taliban, for example, in Afghanistan. Imagine the role of the United States in former times when we were cooperating with many different countries to build up civilization. I'm talking about electrification.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
talking about desalinating water projects. I'm talking about city building. Imagine the business that we could be doing in the world if we were oriented in that direction. Which country's teenagers or young adults would want to affiliate with terrorism if we were involved with joint projects to do desalination of water, to do the space program, to do the kind of things that give you an exciting future for mankind? No, there would be no clientele for these kind of crazed organizations. And every nation, as a nation, has the same interests that we do, despite whatever their government is. You look back in history, tell me what was a really good government. I don't think there were that many, right?
No.
That's not the issue. Let's us have a good government. Let's get back to our Constitution. The Constitution says that we are supposed to provide for the general welfare. The government is set up to provide for the general welfare. That doesn't mean passing out money. It means organizing the powers of the country in a way that allow for productive investment and increasing skill levels in the population. You have to have certain kind of national direction for credit. It's very gentle, not a dictatorship.
Yeah. Well, no, that's right. What you're talking about here, this is really interesting because I've been thinking about this quite a lot. You're not talking about socialism, but you're not talking about complete laissez-faire capitalism either. It's kind of a combination between the two. It's kind of like some middle ground. I don't even know if there's a term for this. It
used to be called the American system. That came from Henry Clay, and then Abraham Lincoln. That was his whole devotion all throughout his life. Henry Carey was famous for this. But if you look back at read my volumes 1 and 2. If you look at the headline history of our country, there was this constant battle between protectionism and free trade.
Right.
And free trade was a kind of a slogan for the power of the transatlantic clique that involved the dirtiest aspects of the world. In the City of London financiers, in the Privy Council of England, in the people that are murdering people in India and on the border of Afghanistan and pitting Protestant and Catholic against each other in Ireland. These are mass killers. And these are the people, and also the slave owners, the most radical slave owners who tried to break up the country. That's the free trade faction. Our side is the people who were compassionate, and the compassion is not just charity. Your compassion is shown by setting up a modern factory. In our day, it should be a whole science city, perhaps, but you're building something that generates profits. That's real profits. It's not just skimming money off the top. Real profit means that you're producing more than you consume by having constant increases in powers with new materials, new processes, new understandings of nature. And you can pay well, and you need to pay well to get a family in the working class that can bring up children, each with their own room,
right?
Well-fed people, and who are the children and the whole family are excited about learning this kind of thing. That's a qualified workforce. Everybody benefits from that. The whole society benefits from that. That was called the American system to distinguish it from the British imperial system. Globalism is simply the British Empire after the death of the classical British Empire, but it's a continuation of precisely the same gang. They never went away. It's right out of London. Who's doing these wars? London and their friends in the United States.
Yeah.
Remember Tony Blair,
Mhm. Of course I do.
then Bill Clinton was fascinated by this stuff. They talk about meddling in our politics. Our country, for decades now, has been governed by a transatlantic clique serving the interests of a hierarchy that has nothing to do with the United States. And
Oh,
if you go back to our history, we had a completely different way of advancing. Some of our leaders, presidents, some of our leaders in industry, some of our leaders in other fields were dedicated to the benefit of our people, our country, and mankind. They also had a different idea about religion. That's an interesting part of this whole thing.
do
They
you
had a different idea about culture, about classical music, about education, educational system today. If you leave aside the nonsense about the woke nonsense, just leave that out for a minute. Do we have? Are we creating a qualified workforce in our country? How would we do that? First of all, you would have to be able to have a commitment to the regeneration of industry and real science in the country.
Right.
So that then you tie your education into that.
But Anton,
Go
you
ahead.
I would argue that you can't really leave the woke part out of it, because the problem is, if there's only so many hours in the day. People only have a finite amount of time. If you're teaching your kids about, queer time story hour, they're not learning math. And we have dropped in the last 50 years from first in the world in education to, I think the last thing I saw was 37th. I mean, it's appalling. Our kids aren't learning anything. And my wife will say, well, Jim, you're just an old curmudgeon. You're bitching about the old kids. But no, we have empirical data. Our kids aren't learning anything.
Well, remember this, that if you look at the history of this enemy faction, say the Morgans, bankers, and the correlates in England, they have always opposed the kind of progress in man's powers over nature that give you independent citizens, independent scientific farmers, high-skilled steel workers, this kind of thing. They don't want that as a basis, because you can't rule over people and dictate to them if they're skilled, if they're independent-minded and they know something. So this faction is the same faction that took down the industry, and they don't want to have a seriously good education. And there's something, there's something called transhumanism, right? This is a whole interest in diminishing what is the actual human being and the human soul and the human cognition and real creativity, and which goes along with compassion. Genius and compassion are very, very closely related. This faction over here, this transhumanist idea, is basically the same faction that generates the wars, that generates dystopian fantasy, dystopian literature, dystopian art, and so forth. They give themselves awards for making movies about the complete destruction of civilization, and this is what's taught to our children. I would say that the idea of people promoting somebody dressing up as a drag queen and going out on a float and acting like a clown and an insane person, where does that really come from? If you go back to Cambridge University, you have a whole and certain sectors of this same faction, the same British Empire elite so-called faction, the anti-human faction of the empire, very deeply occultist. That's where this whole push for breaking down the family comes from. Now you have to be careful with this, because if you get into attributing this all to political parties and liberals, you're missing the boat.
No, you're right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
What does the Republican say, the worst Republican say about supporting families? Are they in favor of high wages? Are they in favor of having the kind of really good income for working people and good conditions and cutting down unemployment? We have to support families. We have to be able to have children. We want to be able to promote the idea that it's a good idea to have several children in a family and an extended family. You have to be able to afford that. How can you do that if your society and your infrastructure and your medical care and all these things are collapsing? We don't have good medical care in the United States. We have a terrible system. Nixon, to a certain extent, brought that in with this whole idea of the government setting limits on the amount of medical care you're going to get, at the same time as they're cutting the legs out from under our economy. Kissinger and Nixon go over to China. Don't blame China for that. We went over there to get cheap labor. The Chinese judoed it for their advantage to build up a modern industry and technology once they had investments there. But this faction, this globalist banking faction, and a lot of it more and more offshore, unaccountable, totally criminal, they're the ones who go, the enemy system is based on cheap labor. Our system is based on high wage labor protected by tariffs and having the government take a lead where that's important, such as with the leading science programs. Right now, we need to have a whole new generation of nuclear power plants.
Yes.
We need reprocessing. We need desalination with nuclear plants.
Right.
We need to have many new avenues of advancement in the space program. And I would say, why not do that jointly with some of these countries that are considered to be our rivals? I think that if we became the great power in the world, we could have direct cooperation with China, with Russia, with Iran. How would you get influence on Iran? Why would people go along with religious mullahs who have some sort of religious dictatorship? They only go along with that because they see somehow that is defending that country against outside interference by imperial powers. Do you know that the United States was considered the great leader of anti-imperialism in the 19th century and even into the 20th century? We helped many countries to stand up to British Empire control and to develop. In the 1950s, for example, we had inspired the democratic people in Iran. Mohammad Mossadegh was a popularly elected prime minister, and he nationalized the oil company, the British oil company. Originally, that had been the program of our country during World War II. Franklin Roosevelt, his general, who was an anti-communist guy, Pat Hurley, made a program for Iran that we were going to help Iran to get control of their own resources and use their resources, not taxpayer money here, just give them some advice, but let them control their own country. Let each nation govern itself. That includes their resources. Is that communism? No, it's self-government. So what happened when this guy had to end up nationalizing the Anglo-Persian oil company, British Petroleum? The MI6 was helped by this globalist faction in our CIA, Alan Dulles, complete enemy of what America really stood for. And I think part of the murder apparatus against President Kennedy.
Yeah.
So he goes in with the CIA, the MI6, and they overthrow the government of Iran, the elected government, and give control back to the British oil company. That's what is that? Is that in our interest? Jack Kennedy, when he was just before he became president, he was in the Senate. He was the head of the African subcommittee of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, and he was known as a friend of nationalists in Africa, in the Middle East, and elsewhere. And he said, "We are helping communists, our rivals, the Soviet communists. We're helping them to have influence if we support the British and French Empire to loot and crush poor people in Africa and the Middle East and Asia. That's not in our interest." What is America? America is the great revolutionary country that stood up for the rights of our own people to advance and not to be dictated to by any hierarchy nor by their own government. We should take the side of these people. Kennedy was known as a senator as the champion for the African nationalism, including Arab nationalism. He wasn't for the war of the Arabs against Israel. He wanted to have peace in these regions, but we needed to have American influence. He worked with the president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, to develop a great dam on the Volta River, the Akosombo Dam. And it was tremendously successful. This is a great project which the U.S. did with Ghana. Kennedy was murdered and Nkrumah was overthrown, but that was a successful project. It was done to get electricity to electrify West Africa, to build up industry there, to get them out of poverty. Now, in recent years, decades, our society, our country would be opposed to that kind of project.
Yeah.
On the grounds of the completely false and viciously false doctrines of anti-population green agenda, to say that, well, if you build a dam, you're going to change the water flow and the rhinoceroses will have to get a drink somewhere else. That would be a catastrophe. We don't care that the children in Africa don't have electricity and they're going to die without a hospital.
Or anything to eat.
About that. Where does that come from? That's the empire.
Right. That's right.
That's the empire. What's our thing? I have a chapter in this book, chapter 11, the story of Thomas Edison. If you consult the popular media today, that includes alternate media that is influenced by occultist propaganda from the establishment that tries to make fools out of people, you will learn that Edison was of no good. He was a Wall Street representative, and they boost Tesla into being a saint compared to Edison. They make up complete lies about what Edison was about. I show in my book that the nationalists who built our industries, and especially those based in Philadelphia, some of them that developed the West, sponsored Edison, got him to started as an independent inventor out of the clutches of Wall Street and this London Wall Street gang. J.P. Morgan got into Edison's firm and tried to get complete control over Edison. And once he was developing this power system, because he really went for electric power before he even thought specifically about the light.
Uh-huh.
But they tried to stop him. London, New York combination tried to stop Edison. He had to go out and do a stockholders revolt with the backing of this Philadelphia group, what was left of them. And he went to communities all over the country and had them set up companies, independent companies. There was a special section of Edison's enterprise that went out on its own against Morgan, called the Edison Construction Department. And they set up the world's first independent power plants. Yeah, there was something in New York and in the financial district of London. And that's all they wanted to do. Morgan didn't want to have any more power plants built. He said, let's wait for the market to see what gets done. So Edison had partners in other countries. He had a German partner, Emil Rathenau. And this was America. America brought electricity to the world. How much do you think that changed things for the better for mankind? That was our whole national way of thinking. What were the Wright brothers were the same thing. It wasn't all just, I'm doing this for other people's benefit. They wanted to make a profit. Of course, Edison put all the money back into what he was doing. They were excited about the ideas, about making, not only making a name for themselves, but something that would affect mankind in a beneficial way for hundreds of years in the future.
I just had a guy on this show, and I can't even remember who it is now. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the Wright brothers, and people don't understand this, that the Wright brothers, it's not that they were the first people to fly, and they might not have been, but they actually invented the airplane. They invented the same airplane we're using 100 years later. Right. I know.
They did the controls, right?
Right. That's right. That was the deal. Correct.
Yeah,
they actually invented an airplane. It's not that they flew per se. That wasn't the big deal, So before we leave here, I have to ask you about this, because I've been reading about this recently, completely independent of having to talk to you. Your father apparently was involved in some lawsuits regarding the Second World War, right? And I've been reading about how Himmler in the Nazis basically tried to set up, and actually succeeded, although he didn't live to see it, set up a system so that Germany could survive the war, because he knew they were going to lose. And
the Nazis could survive the war.
That's right. Oh, yeah, right. But the system involved this coterie of international bankers, and they basically
the Dulles faction. My father was an attorney in New York. He was the legal counsel for the boycott against Nazi Germany carried out by the American Jewish Congress and the American Federation of Labor. He was the lawyer and strategist for that boycott. And in that capacity, he sued many Wall Street firms that as co-owners with the Hitler government of large international companies like the North German Lloyd Shipping Company that were trying to swindle bondholders in America and pay the money to Hitler, who decreed they shouldn't pay American bondholders.
Right.
But this included the Bush family's bank, Brown Brothers Harriman, and they had the Union Banking Corporation as a unit within Brown Brothers Harriman. Prescott Bush was one of the managing partners there, and they were holding millions of dollars in actual gold for the Nazi Party, for their rise in Germany. But if you go deeper into this, you get to Montague Norman in London. That's where the real bodies are buried. He had his influence here directly with some of our Federal Reserve people in New York. But these people directly promoted the rise of Hitler. Before that, the British connived, and you have to say they connived with Teddy Roosevelt to set up the tragic set of alliances and crazy behavior by Germany and other people to get World War I started. So all of these wars, in a sense, were tragedies, and they don't just reflect mankind's propensity for war. If you just say that, well, we'll always have wars. No, this is criminal, and I would like to investigate and pursue these kinds of things from a forensic standpoint. You want to get to the bottom of these things. If you have the assassinations of the 1960s, We need a national commission that is going to look into this from the totality. Who benefited from these murders?
So Anton,
King.
I just had Robert Tannenbaum on the show about 3 weeks ago. So he was the deputy counsel for the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 70s. So, you know, he and Robert Schaefer, his boss, they quit because they said they had undeniable truth. And now he has a book coming out. Remember, the book's not even out yet. It's out next week. He says they have proved that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, that it was not just
that was the official verdict.
That was the official version. But they didn't want the specific proof. You know, the committee said there was probably a quote unquote a committee. But he said, you know, so he came on the show, he talked about it. And I'm just thinking about what you were just saying just now. Alan Dulles was at the very least hated Kennedy's guts, but he appears to be the thread between this thing with the Nazis, and it's like
it's not an individual. It's not an individual. It's a set of banking institutions. It's a whole tradition, but you can't understand that enemy without seeing how our side was the generator for all the progress, and the empire was trying to stop us from carrying forward. All the advances came from our side. So this history, I want to make sure that people that do homeschooling can get a hold of my books and can deal with this history. Every patriot, every truth seeker, every peace lover is entitled to know this history about our side, right? And to see the conflict that's gone on and the advances that we made in this conflict, and how our government was able to, at certain times, to take our side, to be active and not be meddling and be spying on us and so on and so forth. That if you see what we have done in the past, you can look at some of the crimes that we committed as a nation, like against the Indians. Terrible crimes. They stole land. We didn't even need to do that because there's plenty of land for everybody. We would destroy agricultural communities. But you can't, I don't think you can adequately or effectively criticize what we've done wrong unless you can appreciate the magnificent, unique contributions that America has made to the welfare and progress of mankind. You have to understand that in order to say, here's where we're falling short of our ideals and our mission.
Anton, just talking to you though, I mean, just to wrap this up, I think that's kind of what the point here is, that there's good and bad in everything. It just depends on what the balance is. I mean, you're absolutely right. The United States has done some bad stuff. There's no doubt about it. We treated the Indians like crap. You know, it's like you know, and if you want to emphasize that or concentrate on it, you can come up with a lot of examples. But on balance, we have done great for the world. That's you know. But the thing is, and I think this is what you're trying to say. You tell me if I'm wrong. I'll try to sum this up here. And that is, we still have to be on our guard because there's people who want to stop this.
We have to get back the concept of progress and see what the needs of our country are and the needs of the other countries as well. If we can see the harmony between those and the harmony of the needs of all of our people, how we could fulfill those things by changing back to a philosophy that we had before. We used to say, let's use more energy. Let's have more electricity. Let's use more. Right. Yeah, we need more energy, not less. Don't cut back on those things, right? Yeah. You know, so that if we could see ourselves as people preparing some beautiful future 50, 100 years from now, and see this that our interests are in harmony with the interests of every other country and people in the world. We don't have a fundamental conflict with anybody. That's the way we used to think. We were confident. We could solve any problem with our science and technology. Science wasn't about shutting people in their houses in fear in an epidemic. Science was about building the power to overcome any kind of a problem.
Right. I can't thank you enough. This has been really fascinating. I really hope you come back. Before you put out your third volume too. It's like people need to hear this stuff, Anton. I really appreciate you doing this. I really do.
Get my book on Amazon and get in touch with me.
We'll put links up on our blog to your book, so we'll do that for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You take care. All right.
All right. Good.
Didn't turn the camera on twice in a row. Oh man. Yeah, I need a director. That's right. I do. I need somebody to direct this. I do a pretty damn good job considering the fact I'm running this all alone, but it's getting more and more complicated all the time. But I thank Anton Chaitkin there. I was in the middle of doing that interview with him, and I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, this is the reason I do this. This guy, if Chaikin has a problem, it's that he knows too much. That he almost says, he's got 2 volumes of a 3-volume series out. It's about 700 pages total. The second volume is, I think, about 320 pages, or something like that. He knows. There are people who actually know too much. It's pretty freaking amazing. And I think he's one of them. And I was thinking, I'm glad I do this. Just first of all, just to talk to guys like this, and I get to ask them my questions. I've said this before. I have curiosity down to a sickness. Basically, I'm obsessed with everything. I think I'm a little on the spectrum or something. The phone lines are open. 325 call Jim. 325-225-5546. You can send us a text message too. I got a little screen off to the side here. 408-458-5088. Got a couple of things here for part 2. What do we talk about on part 2? Well, it's kind of sort of a newscast. I hate to call it that because I'm not a journalist. But I try to find stuff that you don't hear about in the regular news, and I pontificate on it. I'm not a reporter. I'm a pontificator. That's what I am. So what do I got tonight? I'll tell you what I got tonight. There's Mark Levin, the great one, as he's called in the radio and media world, wrote a column today about on Breitbart about the fact that he says, for all intents and purposes, Iran now currently has a nuclear weapon. Okay, we did this show up until January. It was simulcast on Blog Talk Radio, which was it still is. There's no place online where you can. Well, there is. Okay, I guess Podbean. I guess. But the thing is, it's still really hard to do. We tried to do a broadcast audio only there and couldn't do it because it didn't match up with our system. But Blog Talk Radio was the only audio only live streaming platform on the internet, and they folded after about 7 or 8 years. They finally threw in the towel. But when we were there, we were taking phone calls. We got way more phone calls on Blog Talk Radio than we did off the video streams, even though we're constantly advertising the phone calls on video. We got more calls off of Blog Talk Radio than we did off YouTube or Rumble or wherever else we're at. And we had a guy there, and unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but I took his story as legit, mostly because of his accent. I don't think he was faking it. I've been around for a while. I can kind of tell these things. Yeah, I'm wrong every once in a while, but still. He was calling from Singapore. That I knew because of the telephone number. I verified that. He was calling from Singapore, and he said he was an Iranian journalist living in exile in Singapore. And he said, and this is about, okay, this is maybe around August or September of last year, so about 9 months ago, and he said then that he knew for a fact that the Iranians had a nuclear weapon. He said they didn't have many. He said, a handful of them, a handful of bombs at the most. And I related to him, and at that time, when he was talking about this, about the fact that, this isn't very well known. When we dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those two places, well, those were the only two bombs we had. We just assumed after the first one that the Japanese were going to fold, and they didn't. They said, no, we don't think you can do this again. So then with Nagasaki, we did it again, and then they said, okay, fine, and then they folded. But we only had 3 nuclear bombs. One was spent on the test at Trinity site in July, and then the other 2 were dropped on Japan in August. That was it. It would have taken us at least, from what I understand, at least 6 weeks to come up with another bomb, at least. So if the Japanese, after Nagasaki, if they had said, okay, show us what else you got after we killed 250,000 of their people, we would have been, we got nothing. Hold on, wait a second. Can you wait 6 months, 6 weeks before we kill you again? It's, that's what we had. And supposedly that's kind of where Iran is right now. Our friend, and I can't remember his name, he was a regular caller to the show, but he said that they had already had a handful of nuclear bombs that they had developed. And I totally believed him. I think, as far as I can tell, what leaks out to the American press and the American public is way behind what the government knows, usually. And usually what the government knows is behind what's actually happening. I mean, it's crazy. Now, here's another example, and you're going to say, well, Jim, I bring UFOs into everything. But the reason I'm so fascinated, one of the reasons I'm so fascinated with the UFO subject is because of how it affects and how it reflects politics in the United States. And that is, it's like if we are hearing about it, it's way behind what's actually happening. So I mean, David Grush stands up in Congress and said we have crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft. Well, we've had them for what, 50, 70 years. And finally somebody gets up in Congress. Now you have to understand, he did that under oath, which means he did it under penalty of perjury. So if he's lying, he's going to go to jail. So it's pretty, well, first of all, I don't think he's lying because of what I know. So I mean, I once again, I started at the top of the show, I started talking about this too. That's the only thing I know. I've always said this. The only thing I know for certain is that we have at least 6 and probably 9 or more crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft. When I say we, I mean, I don't even mean the American government, the American military and or contractors. Now, Hal Puthoff, the renowned physicist, he went on a podcast just a couple of weeks ago, and he said, we have at least 10. That's what he said. He said he knows of at least 10 crashed spacecraft that we've recovered. So, and he would know too, not to mention the fact, and he even said on that broadcast, there's a whole bunch of stuff he can't talk about. And I don't know how that got through his classified filter, his security oath filter, but it did apparently. He said he could actually say that. So, Christ, I don't know. But yeah, so we know about this. Mark Levin's talking about this now, and if you watch and listen to the show, we were talking about this 9 months ago, and I'm certain at that time I had no doubt that our caller was correct, because I was already speculating that might have been the reason he called in to talk about it. I might have been talking about it. I speculated that they already had one. And he called in to confirm if I'm correct. I think that's what happened. So anyway, I had to report that. Now, our friend David Strom over at Hot Air today, he wrote a column called It's a War on Reality. And the column is about the fact that he is not, and David's been on this show many times, good friend of mine at this point. We have similar backgrounds. We're both former liberals that became conservatives, and David's talking about the fact here that basically the modus operandi of the liberal left in the United States has now basically been to deny anything that's actually real, that's actually verified as fact. And one of the reasons he writes another column today. All right, I got a whole bunch of notes here on this, and I'm going to try to um, string this together kind of sort of chronological order. I was really taken by this about 3 weeks ago. Emma Jo Morris, who writes for Breitbart and is a former writer for the Wall Street Journal. She wrote a column on Breitbart about she went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and that was about 3 weeks ago, I think, in Washington, D.C., annual thing, called the Nerd Prom, where all the reporters get together in their nice, fancy evening clothes and basically applaud to each other. And she said she went there and had a real sudden realization in the middle of the whole presentation, in the middle of the dinner. And that is, everyone's always assumed that the mainstream media is has done all this crazy stuff for the last 7-8 years because they're they're activist liberals. They're on a far left agenda. And she said no. She's finally realized. She said she's stunningly realized, no, that's not what's going on here. This has nothing to do with politics. These people are mentally ill. And so today, this was Pew Research put out something that said 50% of liberal women under the age of 30 say they have a mental health condition. Nate Silver, the guy who used to run 538, and he's a data guy, he says that according to the latest polls among voters who report poor mental health, liberals outnumber conservatives 45 to 19%. Conversely, among people who report excellent mental health, conservatives outnumber liberals 51 to 20. I'm starting to wonder if we are under some sort of, and then on top of that, then this just the anecdotal stuff like happened this weekend. This guy, shows up at this pro-Israeli demonstration in Boulder, Colorado, and throws Molotov cocktails, and he's spewing crazy crap, free Palestine crap the entire time. And when he's interrogated by police, he didn't deny any of it. He said, yeah, it's all completely, I hate Jews. I want to kill all of them, that sort of stuff. And I'm just starting to wonder if we are literally going through some sort of mental health epidemic in this country, that there's so many people that are just crazy. Now, the thing is, did he accomplish anything? No. Do any of these violent protests on campus regarding Palestine accomplish anything? No. As a matter of fact, it makes Hamas really, really happy. Supposedly, they have been actually secretly funding some of this stuff. And like, who was it? Was it Tim? Who did I have on recently? Was it Zorro? Don Zorro? I can't remember. Was talking about the fact that, this went by the wayside. No, I think it was Miriam Hanine, and tomorrow night we're repeating that show as a rerun because Jeff Meyer at the last minute now can't make it. And I think it was her who was talking about the fact that, during the 2020 riots, both the George Floyd riots here in Minneapolis and also all across the country, there were pallets of bricks that were being brought in to actually facilitate the rioters. And of course, that takes planning, execution, and money. And so where did that come from? Well, I know that in one city they did trace it. They finally figured out who was in it. It was a far left nonprofit organization who was actually doing that. But the fact of the matter is, this is has to be an organized effort. So if we have we have an epidemic? I'm not asking as a rhetorical question. Do we really have a problem here where we have a whole large contingent of our citizenry that is actually going crazy, literally crazy? I'm not talking about any sort of, I'm not talking about colloquially or politically or anything like that. Do we have a large constituency of our citizenry that's actually losing its mind? I'm actually wondering if we have an epidemic of mental health problems and what will be causing that. Now, Strom today, he said, well, his position is that what we're teaching in schools, public schools now, is not helping matters at all. In the sense, we are basically we are teaching kids essentially to be dependent and fragile. And he's right, we are. But I don't know if that had enough time or even effect to filter up to adulthood. I don't know. I mean, we see this constantly. At this point, it's all over, blowing up Tesla dealerships. What does that accomplish? It's not politically, it doesn't accomplish anything. And if anything, you're not hurting anybody you think you're hurting. If you blow up a Tesla dealership, you put 35 people out of work. They have nothing to do with Elon Musk. It's like that, well, okay, they sell his stuff, but yeah, they're making a living for themselves. That's what they do. You're not stopping Elon Musk by blowing up a Tesla dealership. You're not. It doesn't stop him at all. So what is the point? Why are you doing it? Just because you're mad? There's and I've seen this throughout my life. At this point, I mean, I'm 6 months away from 70 years old, and I've noticed this, that a lot of people don't direct their anger at the right people or place. They're angry, so they go out and they flail away, and they get angry and hurt people that have actually nothing to do with the reason they're angry. They don't direct it at the cause of their anger. And I don't know. I'm starting to think that Emma Jo Morris, David Strom, Nate Silver, and these people, I'm starting to think they're onto something. That we have a problem here. We have people who are literally mentally ill. Has nothing to do with politics at all. They're crazy. And like the statistics indicate, that they're almost exclusively self-identify as liberals. Now, are crazy people attracted to liberalism, or does the liberalism make them crazy? That I don't know. I don't. I would actually say it's probably the former. I think crazy people are attracted to liberalism because they can it makes them justify their misery, basically. But I don't even know if that matters at this point. The problem is they're nuts. And I can say that colloquially, but I don't actually mean it colloquially. I actually mean, yeah, the problem is they're mentally ill. So what do you do? All right. 30 years ago, I did morning radio. I can't remember why this guy was on my show. And the thing is, it was mostly an entertainment show. So we generally didn't talk about a lot of serious topics. It wasn't shock jock stuff, but we were goofing around. It was a goof around morning show. That's what it was. I enjoyed doing it immensely. I had this psychologist on. Don't remember his name. Don't remember what the discussion was. Don't remember why he was there. This is the only part of that interview I remember. I said, well, doctor, you could make it, and he's talking. I said, you can make an argument that about a quarter of the populace is clinically mentally disturbed, emotionally disturbed, right? And he says, yeah, that would be about right. I just remember that. He said, I'm just pulling a figure out of thin air. And then I got this guy telling me, yeah, no, about a quarter of the public is crazy. And that stuck with me. That's stuck with me now for 30 years. And now I'm starting to wonder if it's more than a quarter of the public. And if that's the case, like, why? Is there something in the water? Is the fluoride in the water making us nuts? What's going on here? We might have a problem that, everyone in America is so focused on politics. Maybe that's not the problem. Maybe it's something completely and utterly different. So I don't know. All right, I'm going to leave you with one more thing tonight. Mark Zuckerberg started with his vast fortune. He started a nonprofit organization called the Breakthrough Listen Initiative, and it's kind of sort of competes with SETI, this search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and that is it's scanning the skies for radio signals from other planets. That is by quote unquote non-human intelligence. Now, supposedly, because they had a chance to start from scratch, and this is only a couple of years old. Supposedly, the Breakthrough Listen Project's technology is way better than SETI's is, supposedly. Like they can scan millions of frequencies at the same time, and also larger portion of the sky and from stars farther away, supposedly. Well, now, Mark Christopher Lee, he's a UFO researcher and documentarian out of England. He says that the Breakthrough Listen Project has now found irrefutable proof. They have a signal from another planet, an actual electronic radio signal from another planet. They have proof that intelligent extraterrestrial life exists. And he says they're sitting on it because Zuckerberg himself is concerned that if they were released to the public, it might cause societal chaos. And none of this surprises me. Both not just as a conclusion, but the fact that this has happened. Because I actually think if I had to put money on it, I'd say this has already happened at SETI too. But SETI's too controlled by outside forces, so they can't. I think SETI's too in bed with the government, so that I think they might have evidence of this too, and they've never released it. That would be my guess. But this is here. Lee is saying that his sources have told him that definitely the Breakthrough Listen Project has found this. So that's interesting too. Now, whether you're going to, I get back to the whole thing, 1938, the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, where people, if you were to do a cursory reading about that now in the 21st century, you would think that the entire country went crazy. I can't remember what night was. It was in September of 1938, was it? Orson Welles, basically one of the first things he did, I think he was only like 23 years old, he's running what he calls the Mercury Radio Theater. And of course, in 1938, there was no television. So any quote unquote broadcast theater was on the radio. And he was kind of a prodigy and he was really good at this. So they put on this play, which was based on the book, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, where Martians, and they were in the book and in the broadcast, they are actually Martians from Mars, come and try to take over the people of Earth. And they land in New Jersey. Now, they're broadcasting this out of radio studios at I think at NBC in Manhattan, if I'm right. So if you just do a cursory reading of this now in hindsight, you would think that the entire country went crazy. That's not actually true. But the people on the East Coast did. The people in New Jersey did lose it. They completely lost it. Because that was supposedly where these things landed in the broadcast. And there were disclaimers at every commercial break about the fact that this is not real, that this is a radio play and this is not a real news broadcast. But didn't matter. People weren't listening. They thought it was real. And New Jersey went crazy. Now the rest of the country, not so much. I mean, there were pockets here and there, but the people since then, and a lot of people supposedly in government and in military have looked at that. It's even been speculated that Wells was paid by the military to put on this play to see what would happen, that it was an actual military experiment and that he was paid to do it. That's entirely speculative. There's no proof of that at all, but that's been used. So let's just see what will happen. Like I have said too, entirely speculative on my part, that the thing about COVID-19 getting out of the Wuhan lab, that was deliberate, that the Chinese government said, let's just see what happens here. We got a virus. It's not that deadly. It'll kill a few people. It's like the flu, and the flu kills a few people too. But let's release it and see what the hell happens. And in the world went nuts, So it was basically kind of the same thing. Now, it's really interesting too that Nick Pope, the guy from the Ministry of Defense who ran the UFO desk for the MOD, and he's a British guy, and he's been on like every single UFO show you've ever seen. He said that he was totally for public disclosure about the fact that the aliens were here until COVID happened. Because he said we couldn't handle COVID. How the hell can we handle this? And he's got a point. We couldn't handle COVID. How do we handle the fact that aliens are coming to Earth? Can we handle that? Supposedly the Vatican has known this too, and they've done preemptive seminars and stuff like that for years. It was like 7-8 years ago that the official astronomer for the Vatican came out and said that extraterrestrials are probably real. And then they've had at the Vatican, they've had seminars for the cardinals and stuff like that on how to approach extraterrestrial life. They've been doing this for years. They have this stuff. They're preparing for the fact that they don't want this phenomenon to make them obsolete. you know, because the fact, so the question is, well, did Jesus save the extraterrestrials too? So they're dealing with that. They're trying to deal with it, but they're trying to get ahead of it anyway. They're ahead of the issue. They're ahead of the story. So yeah. Where was I going with this? I was I was talking about, well, getting back to this thing. I assume this is probably true about Zuckerberg, that they probably figured this out. And yeah, the question is, can the public handle this? That's the question. I don't know the answers. I remember when the late great Chaz Shaw used to come on the show regularly. Chaz passed away in October. Uh, uh, well known UFO researcher and reporter. And the only thing him and I really disagreed on is whether the public could handle the disclosure issue. And he said they definitely could. And my take was a little more nuanced. I thought, well, the American public could, but if the American president tells the American public, then we tell the whole world simultaneously. And I don't know if the other parts of the world could. That was my thing. And I'm starting to think that I honestly don't know what to think. I mean, I think that what we're doing here, this what's called kind of soft disclosure, is probably what's going to happen for a long time. Just Trump and his ego alone, I think, would love to stand up at a podium and say the extraterrestrials are here, and wouldn't surprise me if he does that toward the end of his term. It wouldn't, just so he can take credit for being the guy who did it. Because that one announcement will change world history. It will change the history of humanity. And I'm sure Trump would like to have his name on it. Now he could have done that in his first term. Supposedly, you go back to since Kennedy or even Eisenhower, presidents have known about this. I've talked about this before. This is a real thing. This is verified. This is not anything I'm pulling out of my butt. 12 days before Kennedy got shot and killed, he put out an executive order telling the Pentagon to work with the Russians on what he called the UFO issue. In other words, he addressed it. And supposedly he knew that this was real. And that's the reason he put this out. It's hard to say why you'd put out a thing on the UFO issue if you didn't think the UFO issue was real. Now, and that's, like I said, that's verifiable history. That actually happened. There's I don't know what the number for the executive order is, but it has one. They're all public. 12 days later, he was killed. And there's people have speculated that might have been the final straw in killing him. It might have not been the primary only reason, but maybe that was the thing that said, okay, that's it. We got to get rid of this guy. So James Files, the guy who self takes credit for actually the bullet that actually from the grassy knoll that actually killed Kennedy, he says that what happened is that the CIA hired the Chicago mob to kill Kennedy, and that's a standard thing. Apparently, to this day, the CIA is not supposed to operate on American soil. So if they want somebody, quote unquote, eliminated, or a wet target, as they put it, however they want to put it, they usually hire the mob to actually do the actual dirty work. And supposedly that's what happened here. And he said they hired the Chicago mob, which is the reason Files ended up with this assignment. He was a professional killer. So that's what he says anyway. That's how they ended up with the assignment. But he says the last minute the CIA changed their mind and told the mob to knock it off. And his boss, Chuck Nicoletti of the Chicago mob, who handled all the contract killings, he very famously said, "Well, fuck it, we're going ahead with it anyway." So because they didn't, the mob hated Kennedy too, and they loved the fact that they were hired to kill him, supposedly. But at any rate, who knows? But yeah, there's a lot of people that speculated that was actually what happened here. Is that might have been the last straw in holding people back from murdering this guy, and so they murdered him. So who knows? At any rate, it's interesting. Of course, it's interesting. I'm talking about it. No, it's not interesting because I'm talking about it. I'm talking about it because it's interesting, at least to me, anyway. So I don't know what's. I'll keep you informed on what I find out about that. But that article was in the Daily Star from out of the UK, and the Daily Star does a whole. They do a whole bunch of UFO stuff. They report on it regularly. If that interests you, it's dailystar.co.uk. I have about 100 news sources I go through to prepare for this show. I don't read them all every day, but I probably do touch base with all of them once a week at least. And I get a bunch of newsletters and all sorts of stuff. You have no idea how much news I plow through to do this, and also just to find this stuff. I don't want to talk about stuff here. Tom Lamas is now the new anchor of NBC Nightly News. Who the fuck cares? It's like, really? You care about that, huh? Okay, I know 4 million people are still watching this every night. All right, fine. That's cool. And they're all over 70. If you ever look at the demos on the people who are watching this stuff, the average age of the person who watches the average age. This is not the maximum, or the average age of the person who watches Fox News is 69 years old. So anyway, tomorrow night, like, we're taking last minute change. We're taking tomorrow night off. I changed the schedule on the front page of our website. You can always go there and see what our guests are. I'm trying to keep it now because we're booked this over our head. That calendar is now 2 weeks ahead. But yeah, Jeff Meyer is not coming on tomorrow night. We're rerunning the episode from May 21st of Miriam Hanane and her book, George Floyd. The heck? What is her book called? Damn it. Operation George Floyd. That's what her book is called. Very, very fascinating theory she has. It's called Operation George Floyd for a reason. I'm going to tee this up because this is why you want to listen to her. I said to her that it was obvious to me that what happened here is this guy died, and it's like that these radical groups were looking for a way to basically start the summer of love, and they quickly grabbed onto this literally within hours to actually start all this stuff in motion. George Floyd died on a Monday afternoon here in Minneapolis, and people were asking me. I was running Kong News at that time, and people were asking me what's going to happen. I said, well, there's going to be a riot on Wednesday, and everyone said, well, why not tomorrow? Why not Tuesday night? And I said, well, that's because it's going to take Antifa 24 hours to get here, and that's exactly what happened. She says now after 430 pages of investigation, she says that what really happened is they had this whole thing planned out from the get-go, the whole thing, except they weren't expecting George Floyd to die, and that the fact he died was just like it was icing on the cake for them. So that was not in the plan, but the rest of it was. That actually the whole thing was set up. That's what she says. You can buy that or not, but anyway, it's a fascinating interview we had with her, and we're rerunning that tomorrow. Bruce Solheim, the UFO experiencer and history professor and author, is joining us on Thursday night, and he's a really interesting guy too. We're looking forward to that too. That'll be live. We're doing that live, and we'll be taking your phone calls on Thursday night too. I want to thank you folks for watching and listening. I want to thank Anton Chaitkin, hard time pronouncing his name, for joining us. If you, we'll have links to his book on our blog by tomorrow. So yeah, stick around and order that, and we'll see you folks tomorrow night. Good night, Uncle Donnie, wherever you are, and good night to you, wherever you may be. We'll see you tomorrow night, everybody.